So this is the first video lesson of our flipped classroom, IB Prep Algebra 2. We're starting with Chapter 2. For each unit, we're going to have different theme music in the background. So the theme that I chose for our first unit is 80s music, and we're going to start with Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins. So our first section is on solving equations and inequalities. It should be a fairly straightforward review. You guys saw this in algebra. You worked with equations a lot in geometry as well. So we have two objectives for this section. Please make sure you title your notes the way that I have them titled and get the objectives in your notes as well. We're going to be taking all of our notes in Cornell style. So you will see, for example, on my next page here, that I have a line for the left-hand column, kind of the main ideas, topics, questions, and then the right-hand column where the majority of our notes will be. For vocab, what I recommend is that you have a separate section for vocab for each unit. So each unit, if there's each lesson within the unit, if there's vocab to go with that section, I will have that separate on a slide, and you can organize that in your notes together with the vocab from the other units. So if you run into a word, or if you want to look something up, you'll have all of your vocab in the same spot. If you have a system for organizing your vocab that you like, that's fine. This is just what I suggest to keep it organized all together. So our vocab for this section is a problem-solving strategy. So when you run into a word problem, what you're going to want to do is determine the best way to solve it. The strategy that I'm going to work with today is UPS check. The U is for understand. So you have to gather the information, determine what the question is asking, figure out what you know and what else you need to know. P is for plan. So you're going to set up a way to solve the problem, and there's many different ways to do that. Typically, once we're beyond Algebra 1, we're going to write an equation or use a formula, something a little bit more formal, but there are other options such as drawing a picture, making a list, etc. S is for solve, so you're going to answer the question. And then finally, check. This is a very important step that most students gloss over because once they've solved it, they must have the right answer. But you might have made a mistake somewhere along the way. So the first thing that you want to do is use your number sense and just ask yourself, does my answer even make sense? Is it reasonable within the confines of the problem? And then you can physically go back and substitute it into your equation or answer the question using your number and see if it makes sense. So starting off, we're going to do a little bit of solving equations review. So this first one looks pretty basic, and typically when students see parentheses, they think distributive property, which is great. We can absolutely use distributive property on this question, but it's not the most efficient way to solve the equation. So another way to think about it is looking at that 4 times the quantity m plus 12. Well, how do we cancel multiplication? We divide. So we can divide both sides by 4, and I do not show my steps, I show the result of my steps. So the result of dividing the left-hand side by 4 leaves me with m plus 12, and the result of dividing negative 36 by 4 is negative 9. And then I only have one step left to finish solving. Subtract 12 from both sides, and the result of subtracting 12 is negative 21. All right, so the song that came on now is Take Me Home Tonight by Eddie Money. I just got it on shuffle, so we'll see what comes up next as each song finishes. All right, so our second equation, we've got a lot of organizing to do. On the left-hand side, we have like terms, as well as the right-hand side. So the first thing I'm going to do is simplify a little bit. Subtracting my k's, I get negative 11k plus 25. On the right-hand side, 2 minus 12 gives me a negative 10. And I've got a variable on both sides of the equation. What I want to do is get my variables together first before I start moving the constants around. Typically, I move the variable with a smaller coefficient so that I end up with a positive coefficient, and I don't have as many negative signs to keep track of. Well, negative 11 is smaller than negative 6, so I'm going to add 11k to both sides. The result is 25 equals negative 10 plus 5k. So isolating my variable, adding 10 to both sides, and dividing both sides by 5, we get 7 equals k. And our last equation, we again have distributive property on the right-hand side and combining like terms on the left-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and do both at the same time since I already have to organize on the left-hand side. It's not going to take me any longer to, actually when I look at this, if I distribute the negative, that would take me 2 steps. So I'm going to do this the same way I did the first one. So combining my variables on the left-hand side, I get a negative b. And I'm going to go ahead and leave this. Canceling the negative, you can think about it as multiplying or dividing by the negative. In either case, it cancels both negative signs on the left-hand side. Make sure that you distribute that through when you multiply or divide by the -1. And finally, I'm going to get my v's together, subtract v from both sides. And I end up with an equation that says 9 equals 5, which is not true, so that means this equation has no solution.